On today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, the draft is 2 weeks away. What is Nick Caley's influence on bringing in players to bring out the best in his offense and his quarterback, CJ Stroud? And Nick, you ain't slick.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Veteran Nation, Bulls on parade. This is the Locked On Texan podcast. I'm your Credential Media member, John Hickman, on the other side of the screen. Credential Media member, the man with the big hat and the even bigger smile, Brian Big Stars Barfield. Thank you for making us the first listen of the day and for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, what are we diving into, Sarge? Well, Nick Caserio was on 610. He said some things, and you know what? You ain't that slick, Nick. I see you from afar. So we're going to dive into some of his comments. Nick Caley's presumed offense. How will his identity, how will his vision be brought to life by players that Houston will bring into this franchise in a couple of weeks? We open up today's show looking at and just discussing the Texans meeting with players. Again, draft season, they're bringing in guys, they're getting an opportunity to know a little bit more about them and if they fit the swarm mentality on both sides of the ball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Big Sarge!
Greetings and salutations, John Hickman.
I'm glad to be back, man. I'm going to tell y'all something right now. Before we talk football, take care of yourself and your health. There's a virus going around, and no, I don't mean the virus of the Indianapolis Colts, but it's a sickness going around, and it got me, which is why I wasn't on yesterday's podcast. So, thank you for holding it down.
Sure.
Now let's dive into the Texans, man. And for Houston, they are meeting with a lot of big name players, a lot of guys that I think could come in and potentially have impact, whether on both sides of the ball day one. Offensive tackle Charles Grant, D lineman Shamar Turner, tight end Elijah Arroyo, which, I think that's a name we got to keep in mind. Offensive tackle Josh Conerly out of Oregon. Wide receiver Kyle Williams, a favorite in the Texans fan base. Wide receiver Isaiah Bond. And a running back, Caleb Johnson, one of our favorites who we've talked about a lot here on the show. But overall, the Houston Texans and Nick Caserio, the front office, they're bringing in some good guys, some really good names on their list. And I think this is where we will see Houston invest in the youth, the talent that they need to get them over the hump. Like they brought in a lot of these guys on both sides of the ball, specifically offensively, where the expectation is depth, competition, but not necessarily matching the talent that they need to get over the hump. And this is where I kind of want to pose a question to you, Sarge, because the most intriguing name of a lot of these guys for me, potential first-round pick, Josh Conerly, Sarge, that could be the talent to replace Laremy Tunsil, right? 6'5", north of 310, an elite pass protective prospect. If Houston decided to go that route at 25 or maybe trade back a couple of picks, if he's still there, because according to Nick Caserio, they got to understand the board and maximize their opportunities. Again, we'll get into that. With that, kind of put you at ease a little bit about the future of the offensive line.
Yeah, that would put me at ease, only because that young man is, if I'm not mistaken, he was a third team All-American this past year. He was first team All Big Ten for Oregon. A guy who, took himself from, I think, being on special teams and playing sparingly when he first got to Oregon to where, ended up being an All-American. And so I going back, and like I said to you all before, I've gotten a chance to watch some of Oregon's game because there's a young man out of Houston that plays for Oregon that I know very well, in Ashton Porter. And so I got a chance to watch a lot of the Oregon games, and a lot of these guys, I just was able to pick up on him, was able to watch some, and he is a guy that stood out. And John, I like that. I like his size according to NFL.com. Especially shout out to ESPN's Lance Zierlein, who does an amazing job of breaking down draft prospects and draft picks. He is, hold on, because I just want to make sure I got his measurements right. 6'5", 311 pounds with 33.5-inch arms, so wingspan. And he is a player that Lance broke down and said that 2-year starter whose in-season improvement and performance makes him one of the is proportionally built but lacks an ideal play strength. And so we'll start with some of his weaknesses. He says he lacks pace to collect linebacker on workup blocks, has trouble anchoring against speed to power rushers. One of the things that the Houston Texans dealt with on the as far as last season with inside rushing. But he said that one of his strengths is his movements are composed and relatively athletic, accelerates hard into down blocks, works with strain at the point of attack, and is rarely on the ground, which is something that you hardly ever seen Laremy Tunsil be as well. You hardly ever seen Laremy Tunsil be put on the ground, and because of his wingspan and the length of his arms, his pass blocking was amazing. And so this is a guy that I like that, John. I like that you picked him out and that you put the spotlight on him because he could come in and under the tutelage and the guidance of Cole Popovich. He is one of the guys that could come in and work with some of these guys that are already here to be he could potentially be a day one starter. If it depends on how he competes, since that buzzword.
word.
Yeah, going into training camp, see how he competes, or one of those guys that could play behind a Titus Howard or a Cam Robinson just to learn. But you like the physical makeup, you like the potential that he has, and I like that, John.
And I also look at 25, number 25. What do the Houston Texans do with 25?
Yeah,
I can't help but flirt with the idea of, because we did the NFL mock draft for Locked On. We went with Emeka Ibuka. But I can't help to flirt with the idea that maybe Houston, does look to move down a couple of spots to maximize their opportunities, which is something that Nick Caserio said the other day on Sports Radio 610. You ain't slick, Nick.
Yeah.
But if it feels like, and I can't wait to talk about the potential influence that Nick Caley will have, but it feels like that you can't waste 25 on a player that we will label just to be able to come in and compete.
Yeah.
Right. 25, the first pick, it still feels like it needs to be either an upgrade on the offensive side of the ball.
Definitely.
Specifically offensive line, or maybe if Luther Burden slips or something like that, or you get a wide receiver that can come in and be competitive in that room day one. But that player has to be a day one impact player. And I do look at Josh Conerly and I think to myself, okay, listen, regardless of how we feel about Laremy Tunsil, one thing about Tunsil was your quarterback wasn't getting hit. And over 2 seasons at Oregon, you look at Conerly, I think the numbers right here is over 1,900 snaps, only allowed 9 pressures and 0 pressures against Abdul Carter.
Yeah.
And Abdul Carter has been heralded as the next Michael Parsons in a sense, right? And so you look at his ability to set the edge. And another player that I definitely want to ask you about is just a couple of day 2 prospects when I look at a Caleb Johnson running back out of Iowa State and what his potential could be for Houston as a change of pace back, the extension of the championship window, which is something that we've talked about here on Locked On Texans. And Houston may be addressing tight end later in the draft. They've been quiet, right?
Yeah.
We've even heard them talk about, D'Amico talk about, wanting to get Brevin Jordan back. But Elijah Arroyo, tight end out of Miami, who's been labeled as a player that is a willing blocker, which is a positive if you have somebody that can give effort coming into this offense and what we presume it'll be.
And John, but before we move on from Conerly out of Oregon, the offensive lineman out of Oregon, before we move on from him, John. So here's the funny thing about him, right? Here's the funny thing about him. You said that at 25, if the Texans don't stay at 25 and they decide to move back to get more draft capital, right? He may not be there, John, because I think at 27, the Detroit Lions is picking. And if he's there at 27, the Detroit Lions may take him. So what I'm looking at the Texans may have to do is the Texans, if they go out and they get, a Mecca at 25, they probably got to, I'm sorry, if they can move up and get like a Matthew Golden, let's just say they move up and get Matthew Golden. They're going to have to also try to find a way to move back into the first round in order to take an offensive lineman. And John, you know what? I wouldn't.
Risky. That's very risky.
Yeah, but you know what, though, John? Here's the thing. Because they are so talent deficient at the wide receiver 2 position, and because they are so talented deficient at some of the offensive line positions, John, I wouldn't put it past Nick Caserio if he didn't try to make a way to get 2 first-round picks. He needs 2 day 1 starters. Yeah. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he did do that. Now, I know that's something that we maybe have to talk about with, Slick Nick, later on in the show. But I just want to throw that out there, John. I wouldn't put it past him, pulling what he did when he got CJ and Will.
Slick Nick, right?
Yep, Slick Nick.
Nick Caley, Nick Caley, Nick Caley, you're fresh, get on. We talk about Nick Caley next and what his influence on his offense could mean for the draft. But first, Houston Texan fans, this is the perfect time to let you guys know that, all right, listen, national championship is over with. Unfortunately, U of H didn't hold it down. But the Houston Rockets, they are there. They are there. The playoffs are about to start. And imagine watching your Houston Rockets live, feeling the energy in the Toyota Center, and witnessing unforgettable moments like an Alp triple-double or a Jalen Green fourth quarter takeover. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person, and this is where Game Time kicks in. Getting tickets should never be stressful, and Game Time makes it easier than ever to grab last-minute tickets at unbeatable prices. If you check the Game Time app right now, there's always amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up, and the lowest price guarantee means they will credit you 110% of the difference if you find your seat in the same section and row somewhere else. When you buy, you view your seat where you're sitting, no surprise fees, and their lowest price guarantee. You can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back, Locked On listeners. Like we mentioned earlier, draft season is upon us. We're getting towards the finish line, and I think it's time for us to revisit Nick Caley's influence and what we believe his offense could bring out of players, Sarge. And before I get into my thoughts, I have a feeling that in terms of weapons, this could be a draft for Houston where, because Nico is so cold, I'm not even going to try to be professional. The boy is nice.
Yeah.
Because you have a Nico Collins, adding weapons in the draft could fall short under adding protection in the draft. And Houston may find value in weapons in those mid-rounds because they know the offense. Nick Caley may just have that much confidence in his offense.
John, what if let me propose this question to you real quickly, and I don't want to take us off topic, but I have to ask you this: what if this year is? I think you and I have discussed this before. What if this year is one of those years where they can just, they can do well enough or put well enough around CJ, and with his growth, give him a second offensive weapon as far as a wide receiver 2, a good wide receiver 2, and they can put a line around him that's going to give him the amount of time and protection inside of Nick Caley's offense to where he can get the ball out of his hands quickly, something that Matthew Stafford, thrived on, and then, continue to build that line, but then say, okay, we're going to attack, really attack the offensive line issues in 2026.
I think that's probably the way to go. And you look at Stafford, and then you also want to look at Tom Brady, man. One thing Brady said recently in an interview, right? And we got to look at Caserio, Caley, and Cole Popovich spending time around Brady. Depending on the defense, he knew what play he was going to run, and he knew where the ball was going to go. And if the plays that he had set wasn't going to beat the defense, he would call a timeout. So it was all a mental game with Brady. But I say that because going into last offseason in training camp, Sarge, you asked a question, I believe it was your question, to Bobby Slowick, and that question really pissed me off. And he was talking about just making the game a little bit more difficult for a second-year quarterback.
Yeah.
And we saw that eventually play out in a negative way, hurting the offense and CJ. So because Caley has been around two great quarterbacks, you got to feel like he's going to have an influence on making CJ life's easier that way.
And he's going to know exactly what he has. The one thing that I like about them getting that offensive coordinator hire out of the way, the one thing that I liked about having him involved in a lot of the things that's being done, because I think we were at the NFL Combine, and I asked DeMeco Ryans, how involved will Nick Caley be as far as assessing and evaluating some of this talent for the draft, and how was he able to talk to CJ coming in? He said, well, talking to CJ was one of the requirements in order for him to be able to get hired. Anyway, right?
And I'm sure CJ said in his California, I just want to be like Stafford and Brady.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I want to be like Stafford and Brady. Shout out to CJ Stroud.
Right. And so with that being said, though, John, he is going to be involved because because you have to think about it like this. Sure. Nick Caserio is going to be able to give him the money to go grocery shopping. Him and DeMeco are going to be able to go grocery shopping together, but they're ultimately going to say, hey man, you got to pick out the ingredients for you to make a meal. Like right. You're the one that has to put this meal together. Here, I'm going to cash app you this amount of money, and then you go out and you get the ingredients. And so even though DeMeco and Nick are going to make the final decisions, it's Nick Caley who's going to tell them exactly what he needs on that offensive side of the ball. And so that's why I proposed that question to you.
I think we got to look at that. We have to.
And that's why I proposed that question to you, is because if he already knows exactly what he wants to do, if he knows exactly what type of offense to run, if he knows that, if he's been around, Sean McVay, if he's been around the Matthew Staffords and the Tom Brady's, and if he can look at that and see that exact same thing in a CJ Stroud, then he knows exactly what to put around him in order to make him successful. And like I said, we've said this over and over again, that we haven't seen him call one play yet, but if he is who we believe him to be, then he already knows exactly what's going to happen. And so going into the draft, he's going to tell DeMeco, hey, look, I need some ground beef, I need some seasoning, I need some hot dog ones, not hot dog ones, some hamburger buns, and sloppy Joe can make a good meal too.
And it sounds like, what you're saying, I need a guy that can block out on the edge. I need a guy that can get to the spot. I need a guy that can protect my quarterback. And so, when you look at Houston's offense last year, and when we compare Houston and LA a little bit and how Caley's influence may impact the draft, 2024 Texans offensive numbers ranked 19th EPA per play, 25th in yards per play, 28th in successful play rate, 30th in rushing EPA per run. Was pretty bad, right? And he's talked about hey, we got to start from the inside out. He's put an emphasis on upgrading the offensive line. And then we know DeMeco Ryans feel the same way. And Nick Caserio goes out there, and now we're seeing bodies moving in and out of the franchise. And so, I think Nick Caley's arrival will change Houston's offense for the better, of course, but more so the timing and precision of the offense, which I think will have a major impact on the Houston Texans game plan. I look at Isaiah Bond late, a mid-round to late round for the Houston Texans, and I think that would make sense for Houston. Straight line speedster that can beat a defender to his spot. Essentially, the expectation there will be to fulfill the Tank Dell role. 58% of his snaps at Bama was in the slot, got to Texas, and in his limited time was featured a little bit more outside. Then you got a Kyle Williams, who again will be a mid to late round pick, and he makes a lot of sense as well. And I think he's a player that Houston could greatly benefit from drafting, not only for a specific role, but you look at maximizing Nico Collins, you got to get another guy on the opposite side. Like what makes Cincinnati so dangerous is you got Chase and T. Higgins.
Yeah.
And I'm not calling Kyle Williams Chase nor T. Higgins, but you got a guy on the other side that can do a lot of the things that your number one guy can do. That puts pressures on the defense, right? Yeah. That also allows the guy, whoever's on the inside, Christian Kirk, John Mechie, Berrios, that allows for those guys to kind of just be like open weapons. And we campaign for a first-round wide receiver in this year's draft, rightfully so. We know that's a need. Well, we could be right or wrong. However, when you compare the Rams offense to Houston's last year, LA was a team with a 45% rushing success rate, 6th in the league, which allowed them to control the game from an offensive perspective, compared to Houston 34% rushing rate, success rate, which allowed Houston to get punched in the mouth and not be able to dictate games offensively for 4 quarters. And that forced Houston to be in a lot of bad second and long, third and long situations. And so I think when we look at the arrival of Nick Caley, Sarge, we're going to see a guy that understands the value of what beats opposing defenses. And it's not always number one guy. Sometimes it's a number 2. Sometimes it's a number 3 guy that just knows his role. We've seen it a long time for New England.
Well, John, I'm going to say it like this. Caley's impact on the draft could also be this. And, you know, I know that I've campaigned for getting a wide receiver at number 25, but I think that I just changed my own mind.
Listen, we both campaigned for wide receivers at 25.
And I just changed my own mind. And the reason why I just changed my own mind, John, and I would say probably go offensive lineman, is because I think that the Houston Texans could potentially already have their number 2 wide receiver on their roster. You think about it. Nick Caley comes from a system where he watched Cooper Kupp and Pika Nakua. Pika Nakua, somebody that nobody knew he could do what he could do until he got inside of that Sean McVay type system, and look at how he thrived. Why can't that be Xavier Hutchinson?
Yeah.
Why can't that be Xavier Hutchinson, who is also a big body wide receiver? And if you look at the way that CJ plays, he loves looking for those big body wide receivers that has the big targets, big catch radius. And listen, I understand if you look at the numbers, if you look at some of the reps, you're going to automatically say, nah, not Xavier Hutchinson. But you also have to remember that this young man has to be given this young man has to be given the opportunity to make mistakes, but to also be able to grow, because he's going into this is his 3rd year in the league. And so as a rookie, you know, of course, he had to make his way into the league, make sure that he made the roster, even after all the accolades that he had. But his first 2 years were under a system that they just got rid of the offensive coordinator. So Xavier Hutchinson could potentially be wide receiver number 2 for them, along, you know, match him up along with Christian Kirk. And if you draft a wide receiver on the 2nd or 3rd day, then you just throw him into the mix. But I think Xavier Hutchinson could do it.
He's a guy. I'm sorry.
No, I'm done.
No, I think Hutch is a guy that if we look at what D'Amico Ryans has said, like they want guys to be able to get open. That's where I'm going to give Mechie the nod over Hutchinson. Like, I think that's an issue for Hutch at this level. Do I doubt that he'll make the roster? I'm not saying that, because we could see Caley come in and scheme him up and put him in the slot and find a way to get him open, which is, you look at Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. That's what helped Cooper Kupp win Triple Crown a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
Being the guy that was in the slot. But I think what makes why we can justify going tackle in the 1st round before we move on, it gives your quarterback if you have an elite line with an elite pocket passer like CJ Stroud, giving him the opportunity to scan and dissect the defense and know where the ball is going really helps the flow of an offense. And that's where Houston struggled a lot last year. And getting the Josh Conerly, Sarge, I think we can agree, potentially could be your talent-wise Laremy Tunsil.
Yeah. And John, look, let me tell you something before we move on. My mind's probably gonna change in the next 2 days, so I'm just changing my own mind right now.
Okay, listen, ain't nothing wrong with that. Also, you got to consider whoever Houston brings in, they need for those guys to come in and be able to at least practice, and especially the offensive line. The last couple of off seasons, going back to 22, like Kenyon Green couldn't go through everything. That was an issue. So looking at players that can come in day one and say, we got no problem with you practicing, you good. Okay, let's go. Now we got to talk about Nick Caserio and some of his comments that he made on Sports Radio 610. We'll dive into that and more when we come back. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, a couple of things. Sarge, they did meet with Jaden Higgins a couple of months ago at the Combine. I'm going to tell y'all right now, Higgins on the opposite side of Nico Collins, that'd be scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Potentially that'd be scary. But we gotta look at some of Nick Caserio's comments. No position is off limits. This is on Sports Radio 610. He also said in the first 3 to 4 picks, other than quarterback, any position is on the table. And he also said we got to maximize our opportunities and understand the board. Nick and that vest, man, you just never know what him and that vest and that kale salad gonna be doing.
For sure.
But I can honestly see Nick looking at this draft and saying, man, we may find more value if we move around a little bit.
Yeah. And John, I will say this. It's funny. It's funny that you say that, and it's funny when Nick Caserio made those comments about looking at the board. I just think that he looked at that board and says, either we don't have enough or we have enough to do what we need to do and make some trades. I asked him specifically at the draft combine, well, how do you assess drafting a player versus using those draft picks to maybe go out and get a player that's a veteran player that's on another team? How do you assess keeping those draft picks compared to shipping them off? And of course, in true Nick Caserio fashion, he answered it exactly the way that I thought that he would answer it. You got to assess, the needs and the wants of the team right now, especially with the team that you have to trade with, because it takes 2 teams to trade. And then if you got the 2 teams that needs to trade, you also got to look at what's best for the team. And when you look at what's best for the team, now we got to look at, so what position do we really need and what are they asking for? So when you break down the minutia of all that, see, that's how Nick Caserio gets to talking. And then I'm like, hey, Nick, just break it down to me like I'm in the 4th grade.
Yeah.
But John, he said that, and because I've been around Nick Caserio so long, I know that he'll tell us one thing all the while his mind is moving to be able to do something else. Because we talked. I asked him about trades, and then what did he do a couple of weeks later? Traded Laremy Tunsil. So I don't trust him sticking to the plan that's on the board. I always feel that there's an ulterior motive.
Of course. And I think when you look at the position Houston is in,
yep,
they are in a very I think special position. But if they are picking where the rest of the playoff teams are picking.
Yeah.
And the rest of those playoff teams are looking to do what the Philadelphia Eagles did this past year.
Yeah.
That's win a championship. And so Nick could find value in some of those teams saying, hey, Nick, you know what, man? There's a guy that he's slipping, and at 25, if he's there, we got a package for you. Right? Yeah. I mean, and Nick could look at the board and say, okay, you guys are at 28. Okay, you want to jump up. All right. We have about 5 players here that we like. They're going to still be available, but we know that day one it can come in and be impactful players. All right, and then you may throw in a 4th. Okay, there's a few guys in that day, in the mid-round that we really like. And so value for Nick, I think, is like water for us as regular humans. Like, we need it.
Yeah.
He needs that value.
You know what, John? Let me ask you. Let's just go ahead and because we from Houston, man. So let's just go ahead and break this thing down. John, the position that the Houston Texans are in right now is on your vehicle. You either got to get your brakes fixed or you got to replace 2 tires that's bald. Which one you doing first, John?
I'm
Are you
getting
getting your
my
brakes
tire-
fixed
Ooh.
or you gonna get your tires? You see what I'm saying? And the reason why I say that is because they got two positions that need to be filled immediately. They got the offensive line position that needs to be filled, and they got a wide receiver spot that needs to be filled. So now, do I need my brakes to stop this vehicle, or do I need those two tires replaced so I don't have a blowout when I'm on the freeway? That's what Nick is going to have to assess. And so if Nick is going to get his brakes fixed first, and that would be the offensive lineman, then maybe he needs to go to one of them tire resale shops and get him some May pops that'll hold him long enough till he's able to afford two tires. If he's going to go and get the two tires first, then you might want to go ahead and see if you got one of them uncles that can work on your ABS system. That's still what they use for brakes, right? I don't know. These cars are computerized now, but go find somebody that may be able to just change your calipers, or maybe just change the rotors or something like that. That's where they at, John. Do you get the brakes fixed or do you get the tires replaced?
And again, I think the good thing about it, where Houston is right now, is I think they feel somewhat confident in what they've done this offseason. And I think the confidence level is really because of who they brought in as a coach. I think that really matters for Houston. And I think that they believe so much in CJ Stroud's ability that wide receiver will work itself out. And you still got that guy over there. 12 is out there. Now, you and I know that's not enough. You and I know that based off the offseason acquisitions, Houston needs to come out of this draft with at least two new wide receivers. Yeah. One early, maybe second round. If they go first round, that's fine. One late. They got 2 7th-round picks. Guys will be there. Talent will be there, especially for a room that isn't the prettiest.
Yeah.
They are.
But, John,
I think they go tackle first now. Now, with all of these moves that they made, I'm starting to believe that they go tackle first.
Okay, John, but you say the coach, right? And like I keep saying, I believe that Nick Caley can do a great job. I don't want to say that he's not going to, but I just don't know. Like if they'd have brought in, what's his name? The head coach now that's with the Chicago Bears, Ben Johnson. Yeah. If they would have got Ben Johnson, if I'd have seen Ben Johnson, he didn't get a head coaching job, and then they were able to bring him in here, then I'd be like, okay, because the proof is in the pudding. Or if they were able to get Cliff Kingsbury, from Washington, if they would have found a way to get him from the Commanders to be able to call plays here, you're like, hey, look, I've seen him call plays. The proof is in the pudding. Or if you got the offensive coordinator, from like the Cincinnati Bengals, I would have been like, okay, I would believe in what is being said. But like I said, I'm always skeptical, John, because it isn't the fear of the unknown when it comes to Nick Caley. It's just the unknown. Like I'm not afraid of it. I just don't know what it is, and I don't want to go out on record and say that he's going to come in here and make this offense walk on water. I'm not going to say he's going to come in and do a miracle and take them to the number one offense. He could, but then they could also be worse than 2 years later. We could be talking about the new offensive coordinator that's coming in here that's running a different scheme and blase this and blase that.
If we do that, then we'll see more bodies in that front office. Bottom moved on from. Yeah. Thank y'all for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Please be sure to subscribe, like, and comment on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast.
Yeah, hey John, Nick Caley will be gone and Nick Caserio will be gone. And make sure you follow me on the app.
Be gone too.
Follow me on the app, formerly known as Twitter at Big Star Sports with a Z at the end.
Until next time, ladies and gents, peace.